Okay, so this presentation is not going to dig into the details of REACH. This is a high-level presentation. I intend to give you an overview and to set some reminders and to maybe bring out some considerations you need to have near the front of your mind as we're entering 2016 and approaching rapidly the next deadline for REACH registrations. If a greater detailed understanding of REACH is your goal, I'm concerned that this webinar might move a little too fast for you. I would encourage you to hang on and see what you can pick up from it, but I'd also encourage you to take a look at some of our upcoming training courses. Specifically in May, here in Pittsburgh, we're going to be running a series of 3 one-day courses: REACH Essentials on May 10th, REACH Practical Implementation on May 11th, and a new course, we have not run this before, although it's content we've presented in the past, European Regulations for Article Manufacturers, Importers, and Distributors. So that's kind of a set of special case issues that often come up for people who are somewhat on the outskirts of REACH. As you should be aware, REACH is a very active piece of regulation. ChemADVISOR is committed to being informed on REACH and for disseminating that information, and you should be aware of 2 of the major methods we use to do that. The first is one I've already mentioned, our YouTube channel at ChemADVISOR TV. Most of our webinars get recorded and posted at that location. In addition, we're also occasionally generating specific videos that could be available there as well. We also have our blog. You get to that by going to ChemADVISOR.com and look for the link for our web blog. And the blog is a very active forum for news, information, and just interesting items pertaining to ChemADVISOR and to the regulations we follow. Finally, in the case of REACH, I'd also remind you that ECHA does have a very good website, and if you need to clarify information, that's often a very good place to start. Okay. I also wanted to give you the framework that we use when we're talking to potential customers or existing customers about REACH questions. As I said, REACH is very complicated, so it's often unwise to just jump into a project. It makes more sense to go through a standard process to make sure we understand and we have mutual agreement on what the scope and the issues involved are. So this is a rough outline of what we do. When you come to us with a REACH question, or particularly a strategic REACH question, how do I go about publishing a dossier or so forth? First thing we do is we audit your situation. We review it. We make sure we fully understand what your issues are. And those issues are what I'm going to talk about during the course of this presentation. Once we have a good understanding of what's happening in your situation, we then develop a compliance plan. We make a statement of what you want to do and what options you have available to you. And then once we have agreement on that plan, we then develop something to execute that plan. And of course, every plan is going to be different. It's going to be based on your specific situation. Now, the 1-minute description of what REACH is. It stands for REACH, Registration, Authorization, and Restriction of Chemicals. And I like to point out that even in its name, there's more to REACH than meets the eye, because you're missing an R out of that acronym. REACH aims to put the burden of proof on the companies doing business in the European Union. So REACH wants, it's their intent to put the burden of proof on you. It's your job to identify and manage the risks. It's your job to demonstrate to ECHA how the substance can be used safely. And under REACH, it's your job to communicate that risk management measures to your users. It is an understood goal of REACH to replace the most hazardous substances with less hazardous substances. This is usually through substitution. But it is also part of the intent of REACH to do this by taking some substances just straight out off the market. Now there is a regulatory mechanism to remove substances from the market, and that's the authorization and restriction part of REACH. But there's also perhaps a subtler way of removing them from the market, and that is to make an increased regulatory burden so that it's not worth your while to continue to do business. That is, it's to some degree, an intent of what REACH is doing. And to American ears, that often doesn't make much sense the first time you hear it, but that is a goal of the European regulators. I'd also like to point out that REACH has been called the most complicated regulation on the planet. Again, I know I'm speaking to a largely American audience here on this call. Put that up against the IRS tax code. That gives you an idea of how much you're dealing with when you're taking on a REACH problem. And I'd like to use this point to remind you that there's a role for a group like ChemADVISOR to play in your problems. In the same way that you wouldn't go up against the IRS without an accountant on your side, it doesn't make much sense to go up against REACH without someone dedicated to the legislation on your side or the regulation on your side. Now, I also like to remind people that compliance, this is all compliance, but particularly REACH, is a business decision. Now, I don't mean that you take all the benefits of complying with REACH on one side and all the negatives of not complying it, weigh them, and see which one wins. That's not at all what I'm suggesting there. Instead, I'm saying that in order to do the best by your company under REACH, you have to think about your strategic goals and strategic direction. You also have to be aware that REACH is harder for you when you're outside of the EU. I'm not at all claiming that if you have a facility in the European Union that it's easy, but there are certain decisions that become much easier when you're in that situation. They're much clearer. Whereas when you're outside of the EU, you have many options and you have many more risks or opportunities that are open to you, so it makes it a harder decision-making process. And that's in part because REACH deals not only with chemical hazards, although that is clearly a critical part of the regulation, but it also deals with your relationship to your marketplace, all actors up and down the supply chain. So the decisions you make about REACH compliance are going to affect your vendors, they're going to affect your customers, they're going to affect interested parties such as your, say, importers or your warehousers. It's going to affect the marketplace as a whole. Your competitors are in this mix as well. Another way to take all that and put it is, under REACH, you are strongly encouraged to consider the cost of compliance versus what is the value of the market. An example that I've heard from my own people that I work with, when your ace salesperson sells 2 pallets of material that are going to Italy, he gets a bonus, but you get 6 months more worth of work. And there's a certain reality to that, and your organization needs to be thinking about that in order to make good decisions under REACH for the whole organization. Okay. REACH is based on data. You need to have a fair amount of information to be able to comply with REACH. And it turns out this data can be slippery. So I want to review what you need to know going in order to be able to make REACH decisions. And these, what you need to know going in slides, are where any conversation with ChemADVISOR about REACH begins. These are the things we're going to be asking you up front. First of all, what substances are involved? Now, hopefully, you're able to narrow that down to a set of pure substances. Usually, pure substances have a CAS number or an EC number, some other identifier. Basically, they have a clear chemical formula and clear chemical structure that you're able to use to identify the substance. But as we all know, the world's a lot messier than that, and many of your products are going to be reaction masses. They're going to be, with REACH terms, UVCVs. and that would be an unknown or variable composition, complex reaction products, or biological materials. Now, where substance identity matters is that under REACH, ECHA wants to create a one substance, one registration principle. And as a matter of fact, a news release came out this morning saying that you must have a one substance, one registration principle. That is what ECHA is requiring now. So you have to figure out where your substance fits in this system and what other entities you need to be grouped with in order to create this one substance, one registration. Now, once you've identified your substances, you need to know a fair amount of things about them. Now, you often begin with the vendor SDS, and that to a degree is great, but I also think we know that in many cases the vendor SDS is inadequate. There's not enough information there to do much under REACH, so you need to look for additional sources of information. A great piece of information, if you have it, is your own internal test data. So if through the course of your company's history you've had materials tested and you have an idea of their physical, chemical, tox, or ecotox properties, that's great information that you should find and be sure you're bringing to the table. You will, in many cases, have published classifications. In Europe, these are called Clp Classification. In other parts of the world, they're going to be called Ghs Classifications. Clp is the European adoption of Ghs, among other things. So you can use that as a guide for understanding what your substance profile might look like. There is published data. Much of it isn't very good, but it's cheaper to get published information than it is to do your own tests. So that may be a place where it's worth doing some research or providing some resources to look at. And I also want to remind everyone that you need to consider what sorts of impurities may be in your substances. Because of course, when we say a pure substance, what you actually receive when you place your order isn't actually a pure substance. There is going to be an impurity profile in most cases. And if those impurities are bad actors, that could have a significant effect on what's happening to you under REACH. You know, if you have, for example, my background, I came from metals, and many metals have a cadmium profile, and that can be a significant factor depending upon what you're doing. So you need to take that into consideration. Now, REACH is a volume-based system. The registration requirements are all based on the number of tons per year that you're either manufacturing or shipping into the European Union. That said, we're only facing the last deadline now. All the other tonnage bans have passed. They ended in 2015. So the next deadline is May 31st, 2018 for 1 to 100 tons per year. That's the last tonnage band. If you're over 1 ton per year into Europe, you have requirements, and so you need to identify them and you need to begin the process. And I'd also like to emphasize May 31st, 2018 isn't that far away. I gave this presentation yesterday, and there were 855 days left to register yesterday. So it's 8:54 today, and I'm assuming everyone on the call wants to take vacation time, doesn't want to work weekends, doesn't want to work holidays. So when you take those out, we're talking about approximately 600 business days before you reach that deadline. And in case that still seems like a big number to you, if you have 10 substances, well, now you have 60 days per substance. That's something you should probably get cracking on. Now, REACH is specific to your situation. Where you're located in regards to REACH is very important. If you're located inside the EU, you don't need representation. This OR concept is important under REACH, but you only need it if you're not already located in the European Union. If you have a manufacturing facility, a mixing facility, even a sales office in the European Union, you don't need an OR. You can use that location as the basis for your registration. If you don't have a facility of any sort in the European Union, the good news is REACH doesn't apply. Technically, there's nothing you have to do to comply with REACH. The burden of compliance falls upon the importer. And so it's really your importer who's going to be on the hook for a REACH registration. But in practical matters, you're not going to trust your importer with your shipment information, with your chemical, detailed chemical formulation, with your internal test data, and you're not going to trust the importer to be responsible for your market goals in the European Union. You'll want to, many companies want to maintain that for themselves. So if that's what you want to do, you need an OR, an only representative. Now, an only representative basically is what gives you legal standing in the European Union. Another way to think about it is an OR creates the location where ECHA and your REACH dossier can meet and they can interact. I find many non-European companies view the OR as the equivalent of consulting support, and that's not the case at all. If you're located in the EU, you don't need an OR, but you still can get consulting support. If you're located outside of the EU, you need an OR, but you don't have to use that OR for consulting. You could prepare the dossier yourself and simply use that OR as the legal basis for submitting that information. And in the same way, if you do have an OR, you're not forced to use only that OR services. Now that depends upon the contract you sign with them, of course, but there's nothing in the regulation that says an OR must provide all the support for an organization. So in the way I talk about these products, only representation is a very specific service. It has very specific terms of agreement between, in our case, ChemADVISOR and our clients that say ChemADVISOR takes these very specific actions, the client takes these very specific actions, and that is written down as a legal document that both parties have to agree to, have to sign. Our consulting services, while we certainly can open a consulting agreement, it's not necessary for us to provide consulting support. We can provide ad hoc consulting support on an hourly basis or on some other project basis without having an agreement in place. There's also a concept under REACH called third-party representation. Basically, a third-party representative can act on your behalf without disclosing your identity. This is for those situations where your activity in a CEF or in other places might expose potentially critical business information, and you want to protect that. So there are provisions for that under REACH under this third-party representation. Third-party representation, TPR, can take a number of different forms. And so if this is an area of interest to you, I strongly suggest you contact us, and we'll talk about what you wish to accomplish and how we might be able to structure things to meet those goals. Okay, so once you've assembled your information, you need to start putting it together in order to give you the analysis you need to start making strategic decisions. If you're already doing business in Europe and you're in compliance, this is information you should already have. Either you have done this, your organization has done this, or a predecessor has already done these steps. But as you're looking at your strategic goals for 2016, 2017, 2018, this is the information you need to begin to make those decisions. First, you need a clear understanding of where you fit in the supply chain for each substance you're concerned about. Put it slightly differently, who exactly holds the burden of registration? Who's responsible for seeing the big part of the work, the REACH dossier, happen? And what is your relationship to that entity? You should know what the Clp classification is for each substance. As I said, Clp is the European adoption of GHS. It is the Clp classification that tells you whether or not you have a hazardous substance. If you tell me you have a non-hazardous substance but you don't have a CLP classification, then you're basically telling me you don't know what you have. So this is a critical first step for understanding the hazard communication, the chemical safety aspects of REACH. You should have access to a REACH IT account. I'll talk about that a little further down, but you needed to set up a REACH IT account to do your pre-registration, and you should still have access to that. Now, you might not have looked at it for months or years, so you need to have your username and password. You need to make sure you know how to access it. And you should also have your pre-registration numbers. When you pre-registered your substances, you got a confirmation letter, and that confirmation letter included a pre-registration number. And that's, again, an important thing to have going in. If you don't have them or you don't know where these are located, you need to find them now. This is basic homework. This is where you begin. So you need to check and find these items. If you don't currently have these, or if you're not currently doing business in Europe, you're frankly speaking too late to pre-register. That is no longer really an option for anyone in the European market. So if you're doing business, you register now. Now that's a perfectly understandable situation if you're dealing with a company that's never shipped into Europe before. You've been growing here in the North American market, and only just in 2015 or 2016 the Europeans started to show an interest in what you have to sell. Well, to go after that market, you need to take registration steps immediately at this point. In the same way, if you have a whole new product, your WizKid Lab guys have come up with a new set of products, new chemical substances that work really great, but they've never been registered in Europe. You've never had a market there. Well, you have to register now. That's just the way it is. Okay. So once you have all that information organized and collected, we can then start to formulate a REACH compliance plan. And a REACH compliance plan is going to be able to tell you, are there other things that you need to gather? Does testing need to be done? Is there a gap analysis? Do you need to find your other co-registrants? That is one first step possible of a plan. When you develop a plan, you start talking about priorities. What things have to happen first? In that case of a company with 10 substances, which ones do we target for registration first? Do we have the resources and time to do all 10 simultaneously, or do we do 3 in 2016, 5 in 2017, and knock off the last 2 in 2018? Those are the sorts of decision-making that you have to be considering now, and as necessary, getting the resources, allocating those resources, and in particular, the money involved, so that you can make it happen. This is also where you can begin to consider, how do you want your relationships to work? If you're relying on a vendor to cover your volume, so whatever it is you're shipping, you're relying on a vendor's REACH dossier to cover that. You definitely want a letter from the vendor saying they're doing it. You probably want a contract with a vendor saying that they have to do it. These are extremely important, but very situational, and you need to be considering them because, of course, that agreement isn't going to take place in a vacuum. That agreement is going to happen in a competitive situation. It's going to involve your purchasing group. It's going to involve your legal team, and it's going to take time. So you need to be thinking about how these are going to work. In the same way, your customers are going to be asking for similar things from you. Are your volumes covered? Are the volumes you're selling to them covered under REACH? Are you committed to completing a REACH dossier for these substances? And so your salespeople, your marketing team are also going to be making promises regarding REACH, and you need to be thinking about how to make that happen. One of the more difficult, perhaps, areas under REACH has been the area of data sharing. It makes sense that ECHA would want to reduce the amount of testing that's required, in particular, the amount of vertebrate animal testing. And they also want to reduce the number of dossiers and information they have to deal with. During the CLP notification process, I think ECHA got a response that was much more diverse than they expected. They expected that everybody in the marketplace would more or less agree on what the CLP classifications for their substances would look like. And that doesn't appear to be the case for the most part. And when you look at what ECHA is saying, they're taking steps to try to make sure that companies agree more and more on what's going to be submitted, so they don't have as much paperwork to go through, and that the information they have is just better quality. They've created this concept called a Substance Information Exchange Forum, SIF. In addition to being one of the reach words that's most difficult for me to consistently spell right, it is otherwise an important part of your REACH compliance process. Now, a SIF is open to anyone with an interest in a substance or if they have data about the substance. So, manufacturers are clearly going to be there, but downstream users can be there, environmental groups can be there. It's open to anyone. If you have pre-registered a phase-in substance, you are legally obliged to participate in a SIF. So you should know where the SIFs are for the substances that you're concerned about. And if you don't, that's something that we can help you figure out. It is the goal of the SIF to, and as I said, the information just came out this morning. It is now not ideally. It is now required that for each substance you submit one registration dossier. And generally, the SIF agrees on one entity to prepare and submit that dossier, and that entity is known as the lead registrant. The members of the SIF should agree on the CNL classification, and participation in the SIF and use of the data generated by the SIF usually comes with strings attached. You will have a SIF agreement and or a letter of access that is needed to participate in a SIF. And in our experience, in ChemADVISOR's experience with SIFs, I can't say that there is a common structure or pricing. Everyone's different. It depends upon who has a seat at that particular table. So the best thing I can say is if you are not currently in a SIF, you need to figure out, and ECHA has tools to assist you in figuring this out, but you need to figure out where your SIFs are located, and you need to begin some research into what's involved in the participation of the SIF. Now, lead registration, in the past, in the 2010 and 2015 registration deadlines, the lead registrants were, for the most part, very large organizations. I mean, you have to be fairly big to be manufacturing or importing more than 100 tons per year into the European Union marketplace. So, not always, but for the most part, the lead registrants had dedicated resources. They had fairly developed regulatory capacity. They had ability that was kind of built into their organizational structure to deal with the issues that came up. There is a concern that for many of the substances coming up for registration in 2018, the organizations who will be doing that submission don't have that capacity. For many specialty chemicals that are fairly low volume, but still high enough to make that 1-ton threshold, do they have the experience and the staff they need in order to make these things happen? If you find yourself in that situation, now's the time to look for help. Because if I can tell you now, our REACH staff is busy, but we can we can certainly talk to you. We have the ability to do things for you. I don't know that if I will still be able to say that in 2018. I severely doubt, actually, based on my experience in 2015, that we will be able to say that. So now is the time to secure the assistance you need. All right, this is about as technical as I'm going to get. These are the parts. When you assemble a REACH dossier, you have two main components. There's the technical dossier, and there's what's called the chemical safety report. Now, all this information is prepared in what's called the iUclid 5 software. Now, iUclid 5 is available for free from ECHA, but it does have to be downloaded, it has to be configured. You know, there's an IT step that has to happen. We have, if that's an issue for your company, if that's a hurdle that has to be overcome, our IT guys are very familiar with this piece of software, and they have helped other outside organizations get it set up. So if you, for whatever reason, you don't have the IT staff you might need to be able to make this happen in the way you need to have it happen, we can provide assistance in that. But you need to address that. This is the tool you're going to use to do your submission. You need to have it available, and you need to be familiar with it, or else you're going to have nothing but frustration when you're trying to do your submission. I also want to point out that there will be a registration fee due at the time of the submission of the dossier. And that registration fee is going to differ from organization to organization and substance to substance. There are some guidelines, however, that ECHA has for this fee. But you need to have that budgeted. You need to know it's coming up, and you need to figure out where those funds are going to come from. So the technical dossier is kind of your basic REACH information. It's taking all the information that I talked about earlier today and assembling it in a formal way, providing backup documentation, and submitting it to ECHA. However, if you have more than 10 tons per year that are going into the European Union, in addition to the technical dossier, you also have to prepare what's called a chemical safety report, CSR. A CSR, now you take the next step into an assessment of exposure scenarios, of risk. This is a much more complicated and technical type document. ECHA has developed a tool called ChemADVISOR to assist you with this process. Again, this is available for free from ECHA, but you have to download it, you have to get it configured. And the purpose of the ChemADVISOR tool is to help you perform the chemical safety assessment and then get that information into the chemical safety report and the ESDS. The ESDS, that's an extended safety data sheet, is an SDS that includes exposure scenarios. And the ESDS is a problem for many companies because it takes what is often a 1, 3, 6-page document and explodes it into a 20, 50, 100-page document because of all the information that needs to be included. In my mind, from what I get from talking with people, the ESDS is very much a work in progress. I don't think even ECHA knows exactly what a good one looks like. So there's still a lot of activity here, but it is an important part of what you're going to have to develop. It needs to be on your roadmap. While you're going through this process, you need to keep your downstream users, your customers, in the loop. You need to let them know where you're going and what you've completed. These include your descriptions, your documents that you currently provide, the SDS, but also then the ESDS. If you need it, they'll need to know that. They'll also need to know when you're registering or you're choosing not to register. You also have to communicate that sort of information to your downstream users. So you need to be thinking about, this isn't hard, but it has to be managed, right? You have to be thinking about it. You have to make sure that these steps occur whenever a decision is made, is that decision is propagated down through your supply chain. Now, I haven't even touched in this presentation on the issues of nanomaterials, polymers, biocides, etc. There's, I think, safe to say, a number of very special cases that abound throughout the REACH regulations, also articles, also distributors. That's not really where I'm talking about right now. You need to be aware of them, and if you have these sorts of products, you need to be taking these special considerations into account. This is not information that I think makes a very good webinar. It doesn't, we need to talk about your specifics. We need to talk about what substances you're dealing with, where you're doing business, what your supply chain looks like for these issues. And this presentation also doesn't deal with the next steps, because of course the dossier isn't the end of the line. At the end of the line is, perhaps not so much even the end of the line. After the dossier comes issues of restriction and authorization, if your substance falls into those categories. But the next big thing looming is the dossier. So that's where I'm encouraging you to focus. So to go back to where I was at the beginning, this is much of what you're going to be doing, especially what I hope you're going to be doing in 2016, is make a series of business decisions. You're going to compile your information, and then you're going to, in the way appropriate for your organization, involve your management, your product managers, your production managers, your CEO, whatever it is for your organization, and secure what you need to secure to make this plan happen. I hear from many people. I work in a sales and marketing field. I've talked to many people from the sales side who will say, "We do business everywhere." And I understand why they say that, but it's your job in many ways to remind them, well, do we do that business if it costs us $5,000 to get into that marketplace? Do we do it if it costs us $50,000 to get into the marketplace? Is that still a market we want if it costs us $500,000 to get into the marketplace? That decision-making process has to be incorporated into what you're doing, or you're just going to end up spinning your wheels and having some bad surprises that come out down the end. I also like to remind people to think about the ways in your product markets that compliance is a positive. I do think that there's a natural and somewhat incorrect tendency to look at all compliance issues as negative issues and say, oh, this is just a cost, this is just draining away from our profits. It's not, it's just a drag on our company. I think there are cases and situations where you can come and say, look, we can demonstrate we have a safer product. We have a valid substitute that might work in these situations. And here it is with the Clp classification, the other REACH data, we're able to provide and show you that this is a way that by buying our product, you're actually making your product safer. You can also say from just a business standpoint, we have locked up our REACH registrations. We're committed to doing it. We have the organization and structure needed to do that successfully. Our competitors don't. Our competitors haven't committed to completing their REACH registrations. So do you know where your sourcing is going to come from in 2019? That's a way to talk about a positive under compliance. And so I encourage you to think about that. And of course, your own market might work differently. But I do think there's ways to say that by being compliant, by being out in front of something like REACH, you're going to see an advantage in the marketplace. But sometimes you have to remind the marketplace that advantage is there. And I can't emphasize enough, there's not that much time left to comply with REACH. If you don't have a clear plan now, you need to get one. I'm not going to say you're sinking, but the iceberg is ahead, and you need to start figuring out which direction you're going to turn. I also want to point out here that if anything along the way that I've said goes off in your head, oh, we haven't done that, that hasn't occurred, we're out of compliance. What ECHA has said clearly and repeatedly is, if you're out of compliance anywhere, do it now. ECHA will take a much kinder view of someone who does something proactively on their own but late than they will of someone who waits to be caught. So, you know, if you see anything that's deficient, anything that isn't completed or put away, again, ECHA says, do it now. Get it taken care of. Wrap it up as best you can. If you have questions, if you have an opportunity that you want to discuss, if you're confused and you want to find somebody to help work through your issues, contact us. I'm located at our headquarters. Our headquarters is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We have an office in Brussels. That is where all of our OR services are technically delivered out of. There are legal reasons why you need to be located inside the European Union. That's also why many of our REACH services are priced in euros. So even though we're based here in the U.S., you may be seeing bills in euros. We can talk about how to make that work for your organization if that's a problem. And for no particular reason, except it just opened this week, we also have an office in Singapore, so that's kind of a big deal. We got a new location we can send people to. So if you have friends or colleagues in the Asia Pacific market, they can begin communicating with us through our Singapore office as well. We are always available at info@ChemADVISOR.com. That's info@ChemADVISOR.com. And you can call us at 412-847-2000. Of course, that's country code 1. With that, I'd like to thank you for your attendance. I would encourage anyone, if you have questions, to please submit them through the questions tab. Anything at all, even a more lengthy one, we'll be able to take a look at. And I'll be able to have one of our REACH consultants comment on any questions that you submit. So we'll be following up by email. Now, one of the questions I see is, is a registration required for less than 1 ton per year? And the two things that I will point out to you or give you to consider is that going to be a permanent situation? Is less than 1 ton per year always going to be the case? Or do you have the risk of ever cresting above 1 ton per year? You know, if you're cruising along at, 0.9 tons per year, and all it takes is a moderately good uptick in the economic cycle to get that over 1 ton, you may want to consider registering. If you're comfortably well below that, then no, you don't have to register. However, if you do have a substance that's considered hazardous, you still need to have a CLP classification and CNL notification, and that may trigger additional requirements. So you need to be aware of that. And even if you don't have more than 1 ton per year, if your substance is authorized or restricted, those restrictions and authorizations would still apply to you. So it's not like you can just walk away and not pay attention. You need to at least be aware of where your substances fall. The use of tonnage bands, I have some questions about that as well. That was a way of mitigating the burden on both the European bureaucracy, ECHA, and on industry during the course of the implementation of REACH. So by having tonnage bands, they basically spread out the registration process over 8 years, from 2010 to 2018. The only band that will matter after 2018 is the 1-ton band. And so if you crest above that 1-ton band, you will have to submit a REACH dossier. Basically, the volumes were an important part of the implementation of REACH. As we're nearing the end of implementation, that importance is fading. Now, it is still true that as you have higher tonnages, you have higher information demands, and that part is true. So as you start looking at having, for example, going from above 10 tons, you get into needing an ESDS and a chemical safety report. And you'll have more information in the technical dossier over 100 tons, and still more if you hit that 1,000 tons. So there are still some requirements based on volume, but they're, in my mind, less prominent now than they were because of the implementation of REACH. All right. All right, with that, I see I have a ton of questions. There's no way I'm going to be able to even read through them all during the course of being on this call. So rather than struggle through that, I'm going to say thank you for attending. I would like to encourage you to attend one of our upcoming training courses. If you have specific areas you're interested in, please, again, drop us a line, info@ChemADVISOR.com. We always want to hear from our customers, and I'm always happy to take some time out to discuss your situation and see how we might be able to help you. Thank you for your attention. Have a very good day.